Turning Point, a series of informal conversations recorded with distinguished and notable personalities who are among the pioneers of the theater, motion picture, radio, and television industries. And here is Arthur B. Friedman, your host, who introduces today's guest on Turning Point.
This is Art Friedman. I'm speaking to you on this 14th day of August, 1957, from one of California's loveliest resort communities, Malibu, and from the apartment of a gentleman who began one of the most illustrious theatrical careers more than a half-century ago. Beloved and world-renowned member of a legendary comedy team, Mr. Stan Laurel of Laurel and Hardy. Mr. Laurel, I'm very happy and very proud to welcome you to Turning Point.
Well, thank you, Arthur. It's a very kind introduction. I certainly am going to enjoy this little interview.
Well, I know I am because I've been looking forward to it for a long time.
Thank you.
Mr. Laurel, just within a week or so now, the world was shocked by the untimely death of Oliver Hardy, with whom you had been associated for close to 40 years, I presume, something like that.
No, just over 30 years.
Just over 30 years.
Yes.
And I thought you might be interested in an incident that happened to me the other day. I was in our recording studio at the university, and one of my students by the name of Jim Newcomb came into the studio, and I learned from him that he had just returned from Oliver Hardy's funeral. And I asked Jim if he had known Oliver Hardy and if that was the reason he had gone. And he told me, no, he didn't know him at all, but that since he was a child, he had loved, as we all have, loved your films, and he felt very close to both of you gentlemen, and it was only natural for him to want to go to that funeral to pay his last respects. My guess would be that most of the world who have known and loved you gentlemen on the screen for these many years would feel, as I do, the same way. What kind of a person, other than what we've known from the films in which we've seen him, would you say Oliver Hardy was?
It's a fond memory, that's all. He was a swell guy.
There have been many teams, Montgomery and Stone, Weber and Fields, and Laurel and Hardy, etc. They've all had ups and downs, I'm sure. I believe there was a time when, I think, if I'm not mistaken, that you and Hardy split for a while because of differences.
Well, that wasn't between us.
Was not between you?
No, we had different contracts, separate contracts.
Mm-hmm.
And my contract had been through, and I didn't want to sign up again under their terms and agreements.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a delay and split. So I was threatened by Mr. Roach to put Langdon with Babe or any other comic just to, in other words, make me come to terms.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't go for it, and consequently there was a split up there, but it wasn't between us.
I see. You stayed together, you mentioned, I think, for some 30 years you were associated with each other?
That's right.
Well, that's a long-time association for
That's
two
right.
men to be able to work together.
That's right.
I know that there have been splits among comedians. Wheeler and Woolsey, I think, had their troubles at one time.
All teams
Clark and
had
McCullough had troubles.
disagreements and what have you.
How do you account for the fact that you two members, as Clark and McCullough, Wheeler and Woolsey, Montgomery and Stone, and so on, how do you account for the fact that two men are able to live and work as closely as you've had to together and be able to stay together for that many years?
Well, we went living closely together, or association, for many years when we were making pictures.
Mm-hmm.
Our closest association was the last few years that we worked abroad.
Is that right?
Because we traveled together, we lived in the same hotel, we were at the theater together.
Mm-hmm.
So it was the closest that we've ever been in actual contact. At the studio, you get through with a picture, and I probably wouldn't see him again till we made the next picture.
Is that right?
He liked to golf, I liked to go fishing. My interest was in the pictures. He had no interest whatsoever in the writing of the pictures or the production of the pictures. He said himself that he prefers to keep out of it. That just having to do it is enough, all that he wanted.
Well, did he enjoy working in the film?
Oh, he enjoyed it. Glad to see him when he came back, and, you know, it's a reunion sort of thing. And we just saw each other as we made a picture, but after that, we didn't till we finally went on the road.
Well, since you worked so long with Mr. Hardy, do you feel that you could have worked or could have achieved what you have, or indeed could he have achieved what he did with a partner other than you?
That's hard to tell.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that you would have teamed up? Of course, most of your theatrical life has been in terms of teamwork.
That's right. That's right.
You've done very little solo work.
No, I was never successful in solo. Always had to have a foil.
Do you suppose that Hardy had a quality that some of your other partners may not have had or may not have been able to develop over years?
Oh, well...
that complemented what you were doing?
It was the two characters.
The lean and the fat, the mutt and the Jeff,
That's
and
right.
so on.
That's right. See, most of the teams were a straight man and the comic. With this, there was two comics.
Two comics.
There were two characters.
I just thought perhaps you might tell me how you and Mr. Hardy, Oliver Hardy, first got together as a comedy team.
Well, we went as a team from the start. I was making a picture one time for Bronco Billy Anderson. And it was a little two-reeler. In fact, it was practically a pilot picture.
This was for the S&A company?
No, no, no. This was, I imagine around 1916 or 17, around there.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we were making this picture so we could take it back to New York to show them back there to get a release for 26 comedies. So when Mr. Anderson had been with Spohr, he had a director called Jess Robbins, who was now at this time he was directing Larry Seaman at Vitagraph. So it was in between pictures for Seaman, so Mr. Anderson thought he'd like to get Jess Robbins to come over and direct this little comedy with me. So Jess Robbins brought his cameraman over, and also Babe, as we affectionately call him, to play the heavy. And that's the first time that I met Babe. So we made the comedy, and I didn't see him again, probably 2 or 3 years. The picture title was A Lucky Dog.
Mm-hmm.
It was dealing with a dog show for comedy purposes. However, later I went to Hal Roach, and I made about 24 pictures for Hal Roach, and then I left and went with Joe Rock to Universal. I made 12 comedies for him. Then I returned to Roach as a writer and gag man. I wasn't too successful as a comic. They told me my eyes were too blue to photograph. There was a kind excuse, you know, one of those things. And I didn't feel I was so hot myself, so I was very happy to get into some other end of the business. However, during this time, they made a director out of me. Mr. F. Richard Jones was the supervisor, and he thought I had great possibilities as a director, so I started in. I was directing at that time such casts as with Theda Bara, Lionel Barrymore, Agnes Ayres, Priscilla Dean, and various other of the old stars in a series of pictures called the All Star Series. Well, during this period, Babe came down to the lot and was put into stock. We had a little stock company of comics and what have you, character actors, and we used to use them in all the different pictures, wherever the cast was necessary. So we had a picture all ready to go in which Babe was supposed to be a butler. However, on the Friday before we start to shoot on the following Monday, Babe likes to cook, or liked to cook rather, and he burnt his arm very badly, cooking the leg of lamb, all the hot grease with
Flattered up on him.
Yeah, great third-degree burn. So had to go to the hospital, in fact. So we tried to get another comic to take his place, but time was drawing short, and finally Mr. Roach suggested that I should go in and play it. So I went in and played the part. Well, at the preview, they liked it very much, and Roach decided that I should continue to write myself into the following pictures. So by that time, Mr. Hardy had come back, and that's the first picture, the second picture, in fact, we'd worked together. So from then on, we started to run out of star names.
Why was that?
Well, there were no more falling stars at that time. You see, we at that time, Priscilla Dean, Herb Rawlinson, they were kind of on their way out, as you might say.
Yes.
So Roach took advantage of their name value and put them into a two-reel comedy. Like people were aghast when they heard of Peter Barry in a two-reel comedy. That would have been. So it was quite an attraction. But anyway, they ran out of stars, and finally we just kept making comedies with Laurel Hardy in them till finally Roach decided to make them Laurel Hardy comedies. So I always feel we got together on account of a leg of lamb.
That's quite by accident.
Yeah, that's right.
Wonderful.
Everything seemed to be by accident with us.
Well, that begins to cover the beginnings of the Laurel Hardy team. My notes have it that at the age of about 13, you started with a juvenile pantomime company.
Yes, that was in 1906. Yes.
Now, how did you get started? How old were you then?
I came to the States in 1910, so I started in 1906 with Levy and Cardwell, and I was 20 years when I arrived in 1910.
So you were about 16 years of age
About
when
16,
you started.
yes.
Now, was this your first experience on the stage?
Well, no, my dad had several theaters around the north of England, and I dabbled around with some nights in the box office, some nights checking programs and chocolates in the office and what have you. Just general utility, message boy, and do a little typing of letters and what have you.
What kind of theaters were these, Mr. Laurel?
Dramatic mostly. My dad was a dramatic showman. My mother was quite a dramatic actress in that time. And my dad, although basically had been a comedian in these dramatic shows. So I kind of followed in his footsteps as far as that goes.
Well, then they had no objection. Your parents had no objection to your interest in the theater.
My dad did want me to follow the front of the theater. He'd had some pretty hard times, I imagine, during his struggles in the early days, and he didn't feel he wanted me to tackle all that. So he had in mind for me to be in the front of the house instead of backstage.
Well, when you made your debut with the Juvenile Pantomime Company in 1906,
Yes.
what did you do with them? How did you make that step from the front to the
before
stage?
that, I used to do vaudeville appearances, unbeknownst to my dad, see, and I had the hankering for them. I'd go and see music hall shows and what have you. I think, frankly, that I had quite a lisp at that time, and my voice was kind of broken, and I was just ill-fitted for anything but a comic. So I decided that was my fault.
I see.
So anyway, he found out that that was my desire, and he immediately got me a job with Levy and Cardwell's juvenile pantomime. So I did various jobs in it. I was assistant stage manager, and I used to give out handbills in the daytime, go around the schools, take the boss's mail to his home, and he gave me the return sheet to check up on the night before takings, and then I'd assist in the baggage getting out of the theater on Saturday night, and also play a part in the show.
Now, what did you do in the show? Did you do anything
Well,
for the character you later developed?
The star of the show at that time was Wee Georgie Wood. He became a very prominent figure in show business.
Yes.
He's now in the newspaper business, I understand.
Is that right?
In fact, I saw him last year. He was out here for a trip. And in the story of The Sleeping Beauty, which is the pantomime, he had two gollywogs that followed him around. It was a kind of a dream story.
Mm-hmm.
He went to bed, and the nurse read he played kind of a baby, and the nurse put him to bed and read the story to him. And all his toys in the room, which two of them were gollywogs, all came to life when he went into his dream, and we followed him through the show. Wherever he was, the gollywogs were always with him.
I see.
And
that's
saved him
what
from
you did there.
dangers and what have you, you know.
You don't happen to remember anything about the kind of costume that you wore for this?
Well, the typical doll of the gollywog doll was blue pants or red pants and a blue coat or a red coat and a big black fuzzy wig, black face with big white eyes and white mouth, just like a rag doll.
Like a rag
you might
doll.
say, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
white gloves and so forth.
Now, how long did you stay with this company, this juvenile pantomime company?
I stayed one season with them.
Mm-hmm.
No, I stayed two.
2 seasons.
Yeah, we played first The Sleeping Beauty, and then the following show was The House that Jack Built.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you go to the Fred Carnot Company directly from this pantomime company?
No, I then got a good taste of the business, you might say, from every angle, and I decided I still wanted to go out on my own as a boy comedian, which was quite the thing those days.
Yes.
There were several of them. So I made ventures in vaudeville, variety as we call it over there, but I wasn't too successful. So finally my dad had one of his shows, one of his sketches running in variety on the Moss Empires. So he sent me along to get further
Training.
in the business. So I kind of was a bit of an assistant manager, as you might say, with the show. So after that, I continued again to try out my luck as a boy comedian, and I didn't get too far with that.
What do you suppose was wrong? What was wrong with your boy
Oh, I
comedian?
was just an awkward age, and the material, of course, which is basically the only thing
backbone
that you
of it.
can, backbone of it, right?
Right.
So finally, my dad got me this job with Fred Carnot. So I joined the show, which Chaplin was with.
Yes, I understand that. Now, is this correct? My notes would also indicate that you were billed for a long time as Chaplin's understudy.
I was his understudy. I wasn't billed as
You were
such.
not billed as such.
No.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, just before we left for America, a few weeks before, they wanted to put on a new show. So we rehearsed the show all week, and we had an opening date the following Monday. And on the Friday of the rehearsals, Chaplin turned the part down.
Why was that?
He didn't like it. It was a show called Jimmy the Fearless. So Carnot came down to see the rehearsal, and Chaplin refused to play the part. We had an opening date the following Monday, so at the last minute, Carnot put me into the part.
Now, had you been understudying this part to this
No,
time?
it was a brand new show.
Brand
We'd
new
all
show.
been rehearsing, you see.
Uh-huh.
So I had to switch parts. Well, I was only one of the gang as far as that. So I went on. We opened at the Hippodrome Theatre in West Ealing in London. And the show was quite a success. So I was congratulated by everybody and what have you. Well, Chaplin sat in front for 2 or 3 shows and decided then he liked the part. So I was thrown back in the chorus. Well, Chaplin was under contract and he had to pay him, so...
But his stature was not great in those days. And he was a relatively young man then, too.
Oh,
wasn't he?
yes, certainly. He was only a year younger than I was. A year older than I was, pardon.
Mm-hmm. But he was under contract, and they wanted him to earn his pay, I suppose.
Oh, yes.
So he got the part back.
Well, he went in and played the part following me.
Uh-huh. Now, how long did you stay in England with Fred Carnot before you came to America?
Well, it was just a couple of months or 3 months after that we came to the States, 1910.
Now, this was the company from which Mack Sennett finally took Chaplin for films in Hollywood.
That's right.
Now, when Chaplin left for Hollywood,
yeah,
did anything more happen to you with regard to what Chaplin was doing?
Yes, I was. They had further contracts to play in Philadelphia for 12 weeks. So I was notified that I was going to take over and play the part. But the outfit that were running the theaters, the Nixon Nerdlinger Company, refused to take me.
They wanted...
They wanted another comedian, a principal comedian from London.
Oh, I see.
They wanted a London star name. So I lost out again. However, this fellow came over and the show was a terrible flop. He just didn't fit.
The man came over from England.
A new comedian, yes.
And with him the show did not make it either.
No, so the show folded in 3 weeks and returned to England. But I remained here.
In view of the fact that while you were in England, you got to play a role from out of the ranks, and then it was given back to Chaplin again, and when you came here and it looked like you might have a feature or star billing again, and somebody else was rung in, and that company went back to England, what led you to stay here as long as your family was in England? What helped you make that decision?
Well, the first trip that I had here in 1910, we made a trip out to the coast on the Sullivan and Considine circuit.
To this coast?
To the coast here, yes. And I was only getting $20 a week, which when you're traveling like we were, we had to pay our own sleepers, hotels, food, and what have you. Even though everything was very cheap at that time, still $20 wasn't enough to travel on and take care of yourself. So it ended up that with 3 or 4 of us living in one room, including Chaplin. And so we asked for more money, a couple of us, and they refused to give us a raise. So we left the troupe in Colorado Springs and went back to England, and we put on an act of our own, which we called, for some reason, I don't know why or where the name came from, we called ourselves the Bartow Brothers.
Well, who were these other gentlemen with you at the time?
Well, there's only one.
Just one
a chap by the name of Arthur Dando. He was a very good comedian. And
well, was your name at this time Stan Laurel? That was not
no,
your
my
real
name was Jefferson.
Jefferson, and you were still known as Jefferson.
Oh, yes.
Arthur Jefferson.
Arthur Stanley.
Stanley Jefferson.
That's right. So we went back to England and we opened. The show was very successful, the little act that we had.
What kind of an act was that, Mr. Laurel?
Oh, it was a pantomime act, partial, a little talk in it here and there, but mostly pantomime. Oh, we did a kind of a Roman skit. We called it The Rummies from Rome. Pretty grotesque makeups and chariot with no bottom in it, you know, you saw the feet walking. And we got 2 boys in a horse skin, and the usual military makeup in those days. Anyway, he got a good offer to go with a show called the Daily Mail, so the show folded. However, I got another partner over there by the name of Ted Leo, who's now, in later years, became quite a big dance orchestra leader. And through ill health, he folded up that later. But anyway, we didn't get very far with it, but he had an old partner that had a troupe called the Eight Comics, which was a pantomime affair, and which was mostly played on the continent, in Holland and France and Belgium and so forth. So the partner told Ted Leo that he'd just gotten contracts for the old troupe to get back together again and go over the continent. So Teddy says, well, I just teamed up with Stan, and he said, I don't like to just walk out now. He said, the show looks like it's going to be all right. So this Bob Reed rather, suggested that he bring me along with the troupe. So we had a very bad trip into Holland. We never did get to play on account of it rained every day. So finally we got to Belgium. We played in a big nightclub, because the act wasn't, should have never been in it. It wasn't that type of act. Well, it ended up with stilt walking and stuff like that with the big mache heads on. So, of course, it wasn't the type of thing. So, consequently, we were canceled after the first show.
You had a series of cancellations.
Yeah, we had to get back to England the best way we could. So, finally, I had a brother at that time, fortunately, was manager of the Princess Theatre in London, dramatic shows. And, of course, I was down and out practically. I didn't have a dime. So he got me a room in his flat and also got me a job just supering in a show called Ben McCree. So I'd been supering for about a week, and also then got a job typing scripts for a producer called Arthur Hinton, who was producing Alice Orchard. So during this particular time, Alf Reeves, our manager for the Carno outfit, were back in London. They came back for a couple of months' rest, and we're going out to the States again. So he met me in Leicester Square and wanted to know if I'd like to go back to the States, and they would give me the raise.
Which was a long way around.
Oh, yeah. So, of course, I was very happy to return to the States. And, of course, after that experience, when the troupe went back again, I didn't want any part of it.
Well, after you had a number of these cancellations and you returned home, as you say, penniless,
Sure.
Did your father then feel that you ought to do something other than what you were doing? Again, was there any parental objection to your continuing?
Oh, no, there was never any objection. I mean, he wouldn't for the world interfere with whatever I wanted to do.
Wonderful.
He would help me as much as he possibly could, because things had broken kind of bad for his dad. He lost the theaters, and things were not so hot for him. So, of course, I was getting on now. You know, I was about 21, 22 or whatever it was. So I was well able to take care of myself.
Did you have any other brothers and sisters at home?
I had two brothers and one sister. Both brothers are gone.
Now, one of the brothers was...
One I brought over here.
I see.
The other brother, my eldest brother, was the manager of the Princess Theatre.
And your sister, did she show any inclination for the
Yes,
theater?
she was in show business. We were all in show business. But never got any place playing with little fit-up shows and what have you through Ireland, repertoire shows.
Let me get this straight again. You were here with the Fred Carnell Company.
Yes,
When Charlie Chaplin left for California
That's right.
with Max Sennett.
that's right.
And one of those skits was to be played in Philadelphia, and this man was brought over from England.
Well, we played a repertoire of shows. We had 3 or 4 shows that we played.
When you decided to stay here then,
Yes,
and that most of the troupe went back to England,
yes.
what did you do then, Mr.
Well,
Laurel?
there was a fellow and his wife, Edgar Hurley,
Mhm.
and Mrs. Hurley. They didn't want to return to England, so they liked it here. So we decided to put on a 3-act, which started out as 3 English comiques.
Comiques.
Yeah. It was a kind of a burglar sketch affair. Screwy thing.
Naturally.
Anyway, we didn't play anything of any note. We just happy to make a living and enjoying life, as it were. Anyway, we were playing in Cleveland in some little house, and the fellow on the bill, an illusionist, who was just breaking his jump to New York. He was from the big time, a fellow called Calmer. He saw the act and thought we'd do very well in New York, and suggested that he talk to his agent about us. So he went to New York, and next thing we were in Pittsburgh, and we got a telegram to come to New York and open at Keith's in Jersey City,
Now, what was the act known as? The 3 Comiques?
the 3 comiques.
Mhm. And your name was still Arthur Stanley
So we
Jefferson?
felt the name wasn't too hot for the Keith
Uh-huh.
circuit, so we changed the name to Hurley, Stan, and Wren. So we opened there, and the agent, we were a very big hit, in fact, and the agent suggested that we change our name to the Keystone Trio, that I should make up as Chaplin,
Mhm.
having been understudy Chaplin and knowing all the mannerisms so well that,
Yeah.
it might be a kind of a novelty. And the girls should play Mabel Normand, and my partner, which was a short little fella, should play Chester Conklin.
Mhm.
So the name Keystone Trio was very appropriate.
Now, I had asked you, but I think we lost it. Were you still using the name of Arthur Stanley Jefferson?
Yes, yes.
You had not come to Stan Laurel
Oh, no,
yet.
no.
That was
No,
later.
Later, yeah.
Okay. So you became known as the
Keystone Trio.
Keystone Trio. Now, what did you do? A parody, a burlesque on?
No, we did a little sketch, a noisy burglar affair.
But you impersonated these other 3
I did
people.
Chaplin, and the other boy did Chester Conklin, his wife did Mabel Normand.
Now, this was probably at about the time when there were a whole rash of comedians who were taking after
Well,
Chaplin.
no, after I was the start of that.
You were the start of that.
We were such a success, it was instantaneous. We had terrific success
Mhm.
with the Chaplin character, naturally, because Charlie was just coming up big then,
Mhm.
and everything was, songs were written and what have you, was that,
What year was
Done.
this, Mr. Laurel?
it was around 1914.
Well, then you played with the Keystone Trio,
Yeah.
and you did very well with the Keith.
Oh, yeah, we
Search
played
there.
quite a bit of the big time.
Mm-hmm.
Then my partner decided that, got jealous, because all the notices and everything were on the Chaplin character, and they'd kind of burned him up. So he decided he wanted to do the Chaplin, and I should do the other.
I see.
But that was a disastrous thing. So...
Did you actually switch roles?
Yeah, we did. Just for one performance, that was all.
But he didn't do very well.
No, he did terrible. So finally he got to words and what have you, and the agent and everything decided best if we split up.
Now, he was married to the lady who was also
That's
part of your
right.
act.
That's right.
And when you split up, the whole act split then.
No, he got another one of the old Carno boys, a fellow called Teddy Banks. And so he continued to do Chaplin regardless, and Teddy Banks played the other part,
Mm-hmm.
the Conklin part. But it was short-lived.
Well, now when you split up from the Keystone Trio,
Yeah.
what happened to you then?
Well, I got two other partners and put on another sketch, another man and woman.
Did you continue to do the Chaplin impersonation?
Yes, and then finally everybody was doing it, so I decided to switch out of it.
Now, where was your material coming from?
Well, I was putting it together such as it was.
You were doing that yourself for the most
Oh,
part.
yeah, sure.
Did you have any way or any concern over protecting?
Oh, no, the type of material you can't protect. I mean, it's hundreds of years old.
So actually this fellow who was with you before in the Keystone Trio took with him what you had really evolved together.
Oh, yes, he took everything.
Uh-huh.
Copyrighted the name and everything else.
Oh, he did that.
Yeah. He was kind of mean about it. One of those things. However, it all worked out.
Well, this was about 1914 or 15.
Around that time.
I think it was around 1917 that you were picked up or came out to Hal Roach.
Around that time,
Around
I
there.
believe, yeah.
In general, what happened to you from this time until you went to Hollywood with Roach?
Well, and I played with another man and woman act. That was called the Stan Jefferson Trio.
Stan Jefferson Trio.
Yeah.
And you did a similar kind of act with them?
Yeah, oh yeah, sure.
What kind of a costume did you wear at this time?
All baggy pants, brown derby and
Well, when did you first
red
hit
nose.
on the... You had a red nose?
Oh,
too?
sure, that was typical English comedy. Couldn't be funny without a red nose.
When did you come on the costume that you finally evolved in wearing with Oliver Hardy?
Well, it was just a normal
Similar.
street suit.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing wrong was
Didn't fit.
yeah, well, it did in a way. It was, we always typed it a little bit off.
Yeah.
You know? Nevertheless, it was a regular suit.
Uh-huh. And your derby you had already begun to wear.
Well, not exactly that type of derby. That was that evolved. That was a little boy's derby,
Ah.
and it just was small enough that it looked grotesque, and so it was difficult to get them because stood on them or the truck ran over them or anything. They were broken up immediately. So we finally had to have them made specially,
Mm-hmm.
so they wouldn't destroy so easily.
Well, what were the conditions like in the theaters in which you played in the country in which you toured?
Well, it was 4 and 5 shows a day, 7 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
Very hard work. When you worked.
Were there, did you have orchestras in the pit then?
Oh yes, oh yeah.
Full
I
orchestra.
played all the low time and all the recognized circuits except in the big time.
Now, did you run across Buster Keaton at this time, for example?
Oh, not to know him personally, but I knew of him and had seen him.
Because he was working
Oh,
in
yeah.
vaudeville at the time, too,
That's right.
till he went with Arbuckle, I think it was.
That's right. That's right.
And Victor Moore, I talked to, was also doing an act which he called Change Your Act or Go Back to the Woods.
That's the one. Yeah, that's right. With
You-
his wife. Yeah.
That's right. Did you
Yeah.
ever run across Victor Moore, by any
I
chance?
saw his act, but
Uh-huh.
never knew him.
Uh-huh.
Never knew him.
Well, I just happened to ask because among some of the gentlemen I've interviewed,
Yeah.
a number of them...
In
of
later
course,
years, I met Vic.
sprung
and,
from vaudeville. Fine.
came to
Well, then how did Hal Roach get a hold of you?
Oh, I don't know, frankly. I was playing at the Hippodrome Theater here.
Here in town? That's not here anymore.
I understand.
That was on Main Street.
That was right. That's right. It used to be a beautiful theater in those days.
That's right.
Anyway, I was playing there, and there was a director that was working for Hal Roach called Alf Goulding,
Mm-hmm.
and he saw me there and thought I had possibilities for pictures.
Now, were you doing the trio act there then?
No, I was doing the 2-act then.
What-
I finally split up with the trio,
Uh-huh.
and I did a 2-act.
What was that act?
That was Stan and May Laurel.
Stan and May Laurel.
Yeah.
Now, how did that happen?
Well, I changed the name from Jefferson on account of billing. You see, Jefferson was quite a long name, so it always appeared small on the billing on that account. So I thought if I had shorter name, the letters would be bigger. It turned out okay.
Well, where did the Laurel
I
come
don't know. No idea.
That's wonderful. And May Laurel,
Yes.
who was May Laurel?
Well, she was an Australian dancer.
Uh-huh.
She did songs and dances in the act, and I did pantomime. It was another sketch which evolved from the other two sketches I'd done.
Uh-huh.
It was still a burglar. And a red nose.
So you were playing with a red nose at the Hippodrome on Main Street in Los Angeles
That's right.
when this person who was associated with Roach caught your act.
Yeah, he caught the act, and at that time Roach had under contract for a series of pictures a clown called
Toto?
Toto.
Well, he didn't do very well out
No,
here.
he didn't like pictures to start with.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't like it, and after his fifth picture, or seventh picture, he had 12 to make, he quit. So Roach was looking for somebody to finish the other 5 pictures on that deal.
Mm-hmm.
So I was chosen for it, and they made a test of me, and I went in and completed the 5 pictures, so that was my introduction to
Well,
Roach.
do you suppose that Chaplin's success out here and any knowledge that you had been associated with Chaplin in the past might have had anything to do with Roach's seeking you out for...
No.
Didn't. There was no connection there.
I never did play on being with Carno or connected with Chaplin.
Mm-hmm.
I never made that a point.
Well, were you friendly with Chaplin at all?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
You roomed with him when you were with
Oh,
Carno?
yes. Long time, and understudied and what have you.
Well, could you have foreseen
great.
at the time that you were with him in the Carno days that Chaplin appeared to have the fundamental appeal that he later had for the audiences?
Well, with the audiences, he was surefire every time.
With Carno, even.
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely.
Did he have a similar style in those days?
Same type of style. He evolved that style in working in different pictures and things.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you suppose that other comedians of the Carno Company learned from Chaplin, or that he learned from them at the time?
Oh, I don't think so. We were all in the school.
Mm-hmm.
Everything evolved from what we call Carnoism, you know. We all had the same fundamental groundwork.
Well, now, when you were at the Hippodrome here on Main Street in Los Angeles, and you were approached to do this work for Hal Roach, did you feel that this was a break for you?
Oh, yeah. I was anxious to get into pictures, not to be a great star or any terrific future like that. It was to get out of show business where I wouldn't have to work 7 days a week, and 7 nights a week. And
I
7
suppose you
days
felt
a
you could settle down out here for a while, too.
At least live like a human.
Yes. Yes.
So after I finished the 5 pictures for Roach.
Well, now, were you married at the time?
No.
Well, then when you got to the Roach lot, you then apparently took over under contract to fulfill the pictures that they had planned for Toto, or what they thought that he might be doing.
I finished the contract.
You finished the contract.
And then I was let out because that's all there was.
Mm-hmm. You were let out of Roach after that contract was fulfilled.
That's right. That's right.
Now, what kind of pictures did you make under that contract?
One-reelers.
Were they already sketched out for Toto?
No. They used to shoot mostly off the cuff, as
Yes.
we called it.
Yes. Well, where did the stories come from for that, or the gags?
For one-reelers, you just needed one idea, no stories. Just tell a little incident, and that was it.
Uh-huh. And what kind of a costume did you wear for these?
Oh, whatever it required.
Mm-hmm. But you did not have a single costume identified with a
Oh, no.
character,
There was no definite character.
as you did later.
If I did a baker or a butcher, I dressed accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And these were all for Hal Roach,
That's right.
one-reelers. Who else appeared in these with you? Anybody that we might remember,
Oh, I don't know.
that you recall?
There were names, but nobody ever amounted to it.
And did these featured you then, Stan Laurel,
That's right.
in these Hal Roach comedies? Now, when that contract let up, Mr. Laurel, what did you do then?
Then I made 2 or 3 pictures with Seaman.
Larry Seaman.
Yeah, just by the day. I got $10 a day. Did bits or what have you. Probably worked a couple of days or maybe 3 days on a picture. And finally went back on the road again.
In vaudeville.
Yeah.
With another partner?
With May. Then when I came back again, I decided to settle down and really try for pictures. I bought a little house, and then I went to work for Bronco Billy.
Do you ever see Bronco Billy anymore?
Haven't seen him for so long. Last time was in San Francisco.
I'm going to see him very shortly again.
Boy, you'll give him my kind.
Thank you, I will.
Quite a nice guy.
Well, this would seem to be a period, Mr. Laurel, of a rather transient sort of work.
I'd make a couple of pictures, and then I'd go back on the road and come out. I had my struggles, and then I went to Universal and made 3 or 4 or 5 pictures for them, and went out of there and went back on the road. And I never got...
Was this about the time when some of the people thought they might develop other talents as a writer or director, rather than as a comedian in films?
No.
When
I
was
don't
that
think
that
so.
this happened? You mentioned...
There was a general manager at Roach's called Warren Doan, who took personal liking to me and thought I had great possibilities. So during this contract trouble that I had with Joe Rock at Universal, he'd notify the studios I was still under contract and that he wouldn't permit me to make pictures anywhere else. So that held me up for quite a bit, which he had no right to do such a thing.
Yes.
I had finished my contract and everything. It's just a spite affair, I don't know what for. Anyway, Warren Doan sent for me and said he'd like to give me a job with F. Richard Jones, who's a supervisor, on writing stories and gags and what have you. And then after a few weeks, Jones decided he'd make a director out of me. So that's how that
And that's
was.
how that all began.
Yes.
Now, when you started working with Oliver Hardy then, which happened because of the Leg of Lamb incident, how did you two fellows, did you figure out anything that you thought you might be doing, an approach to what you would do in comedy? The Laurel Hardy films was such a trademark in terms of the characters you evolved and the kind of comedy that you evolved and the way you worked together.
Well,
One would hardly think this was an accident.
We figured that, well, it was. Everything just happened.
Uh-huh.
Like my hair and all that stuff cut short, you know. And
Uh-huh.
that was all by accident. And
Well, how did some of these things happen by accident? Now, you told me how you got together by accident.
well, for instance, my short hair standing up. We decided that we would make a convict picture.
Uh-huh.
But we wanted to make it look real, so we decided we were lifers
Uh-huh.
in the picture that we'd shave our head off, which we did. We were bald-headed, which looked very good for the character. They
Yes.
believed it.
Yes.
So, of course, for the next picture, our hair hadn't grown back.
So that's how you got your
So
short
at the preview, when I took my hat off and the short hair appeared, they'd seen me with the, the part in the middle. They got a laugh, which says, we better keep that in. Anything for a laugh.
Oh, that's fine. Well, what about his bangs now? You said something about his... One time you had thought that you would do this purposely to put...
Yeah, we were just fiddling around trying to... That was when I was directing with Clyde Cook.
Now, what about his mustache?
Well, I never did like that. everybody was wearing the heavies, all wore
Uh-huh.
big mustaches and big eyebrows,
Uh-huh.
trying to get away from that type. And we slowed down in our shooting in the speed of the film.
What do you mean you slowed down?
Well, they used to shoot at 12.
yes.
So we went to normal, 14 and
Uh-huh.
15 or 16.
I see.
We acted normally. We stopped to show the reaction.
Mm-hmm.
And normally in those days they'd take a pie in the face and they'd jump up and run and make funny gestures and what have you.
As the Keystone
But here
Cops
as we
have
got
done.
our pie, we deliberately stopped and you could read the man's thoughts.
But you purposely did this in order to differentiate yourselves from other comedians of the time.
We tried to be different.
Uh-huh.
So we'd go against all rules or regulations or anything else
Of those times.
of those times. And speed and everything else. We too felt that the slower we went, the less gags we'd have to work out. The less material. We wouldn't use so much film.
You had a long history of abbreviation, starting with your name, and now you're working on not much material, making it last longer, too.
Well, I mean, making it, getting the most out of it.
I appreciate that. How was it decided that you were the one that usually got him in all the trouble?
Well, it was just the two characters that we felt the big guy knew less than the other guy, but wouldn't allow the little guy to know it.
What else did you do now? You didn't resort to big shoes. You did have hats that didn't fit
Oh, once
quite
in a
right.
while we wore big shoes.
Uh-huh.
Whatever happened to come along. We'd wear big overalls and things like that.
You made a number of two-reelers together. Many, many
Oh,
two-reelers.
yeah.
And at the time that the talkies came in, so-called talkies, I believe, you correct me about this if I'm wrong, I believe that the motion picture industry from the distributing point of view began to run in second full-length pictures, and the two-reelers certainly began to suffer. They didn't hold up.
Well, we used to make the picture whatever length it was good in.
Ah.
In other words, we started out to make a two-reeler, but if it ran over to 3 or 3.5 reels or even 4, and it previewed, and if we thought cutting anything would suffer the picture,
You kept the length.
it kept the length.
Mm-hmm.
So we practically became featurettes.
One of the things that I've read recently has been that you and Hardy, the Laurel Hardy films, were perhaps the last of the two-reelers to be able to stand on their own feet, that most of them had gone by the wayside, and your two-reelers continued long
Yeah.
after most of them had passed out of the picture.
Well, I think we were fortunate in sticking to our silent reel methods when talkies came in. We only said enough to to motivate what we were doing.
Right.
Everybody started to talk their heads off for no reason at all. Line after line of dialogue that had no meaning or bearing. We were forgetting the principle of the comic.
For the sheer novelty of being able to speak from the film.
That was it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them couldn't talk, like
Yeah.
we can't talk. We're not talking comedians, or weren't, rather. So our dialogue was very static.
Talking made about 1932, 31?
1929, I think.
1929.
Yeah. It was
Which
called
film was that?
Unaccustomed as We Are.
In 1929.
I think it was one of the first two-reelers made in Sound.
What about your first full-length talkie?
That was started as a two-reeler
Mm-hmm.
and ended up in 4.
Mm-hmm.
And after the preview, there was nothing to cut out, and Roach says, well, look, I'm tired of giving these 4 reels of comedy at the 2-reel price. We'll add a couple more reels and make a feature of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how, pardon us, became a feature length.
And when was that released, Mr. Laurel? Do you
Oh,
know?
no, I couldn't think.
It's not fair to ask you that.
No,
I'll tell you
I
why
really
I'm
couldn't.
asking. Unashamedly, I tell you that I was in love and crazy about Laurel and Hardy as a kid. I have always been. And had seen many of your silent films. And I lived in a town called Gary, Indiana. And though I'd gone to Chicago on weekly jaunts with my parents from time to time to see films there, and they had talkies in Chicago at Balaban and Katz long before we had them in Gary, I was very much in love with Laurel and Hardy, and I had misgivings about seeing them in their first talkie, Pardon Us, which was the first feature-length talkie I'd seen. I don't remember ever seeing you in a two-reeler talkie.
Oh, yeah, we made quite a few.
But I didn't remember that.
Oh.
And I remember we had a theater in Gary called the Palace Theater. We had vaudeville there, too, out of Chicago.
I played.
And I remember how when I bought my ticket for this movie, I almost ran out of the theater because I was scared to death that the love that I had for Laurel and Hardy might be dissipated by hearing their voices. And I sank way low in my seat. And I remember how I ran all the way home. I lived about maybe 8 blocks from there. I ran all the way home from there to exclaim to my mother, who was home at the time, that it was all right, that I loved them, and it was still all right. I was saved.
Yeah, a lot of them fell by
Well,
the wayside.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
that's
right.
true.
But I can remember as if it were yesterday, and the seat I was in, the theater even, when I went to see Laurel and Hardy in the first talkie that I knew of, and how frightened I was.
And they weren't too good either on account of being made on records, you know.
Right. Right.
The sound was very bad.
The reason I've told you at length about my own feelings of fear in going to the movies to see you into a talkie was because it has occurred to me with many of the people whom I've interviewed, as it does now with you, that it's probably difficult to realize how intimately you become a part of the lives of millions of people who lived and loved you,
one of the family.
and you don't know about it really.
Right. I've just been getting so many fan letters on account of poor Babe, and some of them are expressed beautiful. It's remarkable, the love that they have for us. It's amazing.
And I imagine this is a heartwarming experience for yourself to know that you've been able to do this in a lifetime.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Your wife had just mentioned to me, for example, as an illustration of this kind of feeling that an audience has for personalities such as yourself, of a young man, I believe it was, who had wanted you. He was ill or something. What was that story?
Oh,
you
this
tell me
poor
that?
chap,
Was it in England?
he was in England. I got this letter and it read that he was only expected to live 2 or 3 days at the most.
Mm-hmm.
But he wanted to let us know how much Laurel and Hardy had meant to him, all the happiness it given him in his life. He just wanted to say goodbye and to thank us.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
I really flipped over that one. I felt terrible.
Yes.
Nothing you could say. I couldn't write the guy back.
No.
You know, there was nothing you could possibly do or say.
Not too long ago, I think, as you reminded me yourself, was in 1947 that you appeared in England at a command performance with Hardy, for the Laurel and Hardy team. What sort of a thing did you do for this?
We did a sketch.
Mm-hmm. Who else was on that bill? Do you recall some of the people that were there?
Oh, Gracie Fields was on the show. Most of the acts were star acts. Over in England, I don't think anybody would know of them over here.
Were you the only representatives from this country that you recall?
Yes, I believe we were.
And according to the information I have, Laurel and Hardy received perhaps the greatest ovation that any act had received.
We did, yes.
From them.
We did.
Now, you have been very, very popular and are still amazingly popular in foreign countries with your films. How do you account for this, Mr. Laurel?
I frankly don't know. I really don't. It's amazing. Still today, they take about 3 of our 2 reelers and they put titles to put them together, and the main title, new main title. And those pictures run for 5 and 6 months in one house. I've recently received letters to this effect from Germany and different places. And it's the only picture showing, and they stand in line.
Now, you don't have any idea as to why your comedy should have that appeal today to the foreign audience.
I frankly don't.
You don't.
I really don't.
In talking with people like Buster Keaton, for example, Mr. Keaton, with some of the other people whom I've interviewed, have felt that the silent films, and particularly the comedians of those days, were speaking a kind of universal language.
Well, that's true.
And in so doing, not only were understood by peoples all over the world, but many of the things that they did were timeless. I wondered if in the concocting of your sequences, if in figuring an approach to your comedy, any of this kind of thing, the universality of the language, the timelessness of the gags, had any motivation. Did you ever think in those terms?
Well, I used to put special gags in for England, for instance, because the other foreign countries, there's nothing I could do about it. But I'd put in different pieces of dialogue that would appeal, I knew,
to the English audience.
To the English audiences, and yet made them clear enough for here.
Now, the story ideas that you worked on, did they originate with you? Did you write most of the stories?
Well, I wouldn't take credit for. No one man can make a picture. That's silly. No, I had some very fine boys worked with me, and we all like a happy family. We'd all have ideas. It was noble. No one thought one was any better than the other, and we'd work out a script and get to shooting it as quick as we could. I don't believe in sitting for weeks and months on a comedy picture, comedy especially. It can't be done, and especially this type of comedy.
Now, were most of the thing, did you have a general idea as to the situation and then work it out in front of the camera?
We did a lot what we call off the cuff.
Even in later
Sometimes
years?
we'd start on a script and suddenly we'd come up and we'd forget the script and keep on going.
And your cameramen knew to keep on grinding the camera?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Does any of these films come back to you now as a film that you enjoyed working with or working on more than another?
Well, frankly, I'm so disappointed with the way they're edited, and the commercials are stuck in here and there in the middle of a gag. And
you mean on television today?
the questions are cut out and the answers are just given, and you don't know what it's all about.
Right.
So, I don't know. I just lost interest in looking at them.
But in terms of the career that you have had, and this has been an illustrious and wonderful career, do you yourself look back on a film that you feel was your best, or that you enjoyed working on most, or you think really hit the grade as you would like it to have done?
Well, I think one of our best was Frau Diablo. Another cute picture was Born in Scotland.
Right.
Babes in Toyland.
Right.
And I like The Bohemian Girl.
A few years back, weren't you in Europe for a while?
Yeah.
Were you working in Europe with Hardy?
Yeah, we're playing the vaudeville houses. The
Vaudeville
variety
houses
houses.
over there.
The Moss Empires.
Many of us would wonder and wish with all our hearts that you and Hardy, while Mr. Hardy was still living, were continuing to make films here and felt very bad deep down that for some reason you were doing vaudeville in Europe rather than working here again. Were you working in Europe because you were not able to be active here?
Well, we had some very bad experiences after leaving Roach.
Mm-hmm.
We had with Roach more freedom. We could do what we wanted and make it how we wanted. And with the other places like Metro and 20th Century Fox, the story was written, cut and dried, and it had to be shot per script. And you couldn't...
no spontaneity for you to work
no,
with?
No, nothing, and the routines and gags are all of what we'd previously done, and the story in back of them didn't permit them to get the best out of it. So it was a disgusting affair to us all the way through. So we were happy when the contract was called out.
Did you make any films in Europe?
We made one. That was the last one. That was a sad affair.
Why? What?
Well, there was everything wrong. First, they started out with French writers, and they brought in Italian writers, and we took a couple of writers with us over there. So there were three nationalities all trying. They have the sense of humor is entirely different.
Right.
And then we came to shoot. We had part Italian cast and part French cast. They spoke in their own language. We only spoke English, so nobody knew what each other was talking about. Then we were just hoping that we were answering the right question. Then on top of that, I got very ill, went into hospital, was operation.
Right.
So I came out of there weighing 114 pounds after 160. So I could hardly stand up to finish the picture up, and it was a mess all the way around. Just unfortunate. So we were very happy they didn't get much showing here.
Yes.
We were a bit embarrassed over it, naturally.
Well, how have you managed to use your time? What are you doing these days, Mr. Laurel?
Just correspondence.
You're not actively engaged in any phase of the business?
No.
Are any of your family still living over here?
My sister over in England.
They're still in England?
And cousins and what have you, nephews.
Mm-hmm. And you have a daughter who is
I have
here?
a daughter and two grandchildren.
Two grandchildren. That's wonderful. Are they all here in Los Angeles?
They're in Tarzana.
Tarzana, out in the valley. That's wonderful. Do you ever get out to visit them?
Once in a while, then they come over here.
I'd like to ask you about reading, for example. Do you get to read much these days, or do you enjoy... what do you do for a hobby or for outside interest now, for example, other than your correspondence?
Well, there's television, of course, is the...
the savior of
my only connection with show business.
Right.
And, of course, my tape recorder and what have you. And my few friends.
The other day when we were all struck with this untimely passing of your longtime partner, Mr. Hardy, I had read, I didn't know at the time, I had read that you had not felt well enough to be able to attend the funeral, and apparently had not been there. I take it that your own health has not been too good recently.
No, it hasn't. No.
You have no other plans for yourself at the present time?
No. No, I'm in retirement now, I'm afraid.
I suppose since Mr. Hardy's death, you have received phone calls and a good deal of correspondence of condolence and sympathy from fans and people you've never known.
Oh, yes. Something I've always done is answer every fan letter. Not always a letter. If it was necessary for a letter, yes. But always acknowledge their letters and sent pictures. I've attended to all our fan mail personally.
Yourself?
Yeah, and in autographing them, I've included their name and everything in
Very
it for
considerate.
all the years, all through the years, even in a crowd. And I think that it brought a closeness to people. They felt that they were our friend, we were their friend.
Right.
And the minute they saw us, absolutely changed. Hello, Stan, you know. Hello, Bill. Hello, Georgia. We were just one of the family.
Yes.
I had so many, many letters where they frame even a little postcard hanging in the home. It's
Wonderful. Wonderful.
And not only from children, but grown-ups.
Well, I was just asking whether or not that I had supposed that following Mr. Hardy's death that you had received correspondence from a number of people, and I wanted to know whether or not you had a letter that might typify the feeling that seemed to be expressed in most of them. And you just handed me this letter that was written from Kansas City by Mr. Ralph Trower. That is a wonderful letter, and I'm sure that I would join him in saying no more than a fitting tribute to a great comedy team, and certainly to a wonderful person in yourself, Mr. Laurel. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for permitting me these few moments with you in your lovely home here at Malibu to go over with you some of the whys and wherefores, and to thank you again for being with me on Turning Point.
Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you very much.
God bless.
You have just heard Stan Laurel on Turning Point, one of a series of informal interviews with notable personalities from the world of entertainment. Turning Point was conceived and directed by Arthur B. Friedman, faculty member under the auspices of the Television Radio Division, Department of Theater Arts, University of California, Los Angeles. Your announcer has been Steve Cardwell, transcribed.